So the general rule is, should you ever be sitting there thinking, I'm in a worker co-op, does this law apply to me? The general rule is yes.
So I'm Marraffino. I work for the Democracy Work Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports cooperative development. And we help VEOC and other kind of cooperative development centers around the country to network and to standardize their practices, and also to try to kind of push those development centers to reach communities that co-ops currently don't reach, and to have a greater impact on our economy. So that's what we're up to.
And again, I'm Marcel Gagne. I work for the Cooperative Development Institute.
So I often get called in to do presentations on like blank for worker cooperatives, you know, like marketing for worker cooperatives, management for worker cooperatives, and there's some question like, well, is it any different? You know, could you just Google like marketing and then you would find out everything that you need to know, or does it have to be like marketing for worker cooperatives? And so in trying to answer that question, I have returned back to like democracy. Like, what is good about democracy? Why are we doing democracy? And I'm going to pull on some theorists just for a second, just to like remind us of the good things about democracy. So participatory democracy in particular. There's kind of like two branches of why we should do democracy. One is that it makes better people. That democracy has these educative impacts on people's character and attitudes that are necessary for a free society. So people, they sympathize with each other, they debate issues, there's like deliberation, and through that process they become the people who can govern a free society through democracy. So that's one side. The other is that it protects us against the tyrants, so that we can elect, you know, the nicest of the tyrants. We don't want the worst, and if they screw us over, we get rid of them. And that's what democracy is for. Is it's like a holding thing that we have, so that if the powerful abuse us, we can get rid of them and get a different powerful one. So those are the two major theories. And I'm applying that to HR in this way that basically HR has two branches also. And a lot of this is coming from a series of studies that I did with my organization and the University of Wisconsin, looking at case studies of HR in worker co-ops that I'm going to go into in a minute. But basically, when we asked, like, do you do HR, do you do personnel, there was these two threads. One is that the personnel activities they do, they create the members. They make the members better citizens. They build the citizens that they need for their free society, which is their local co-op. And then the second thing is that they protect against bad citizens taking root, so that they have ways to get people out, they have ways to keep people coming in. And personnel has these two kind of sides. One is the creative, one is the controlling. You guys with me so far on this? I know I'm taking it to kind of theoretical place to start with. So a way to look at this is to look at the life cycle of the worker, and then think like, how do personnel managers, which doesn't have to be, you know, that's your title, but someone who's working in that area, what do they do? So here's the life cycle of the worker. They apply, they get hired, they work, they get evaluated, they perform. If all goes well, they become a member. They get voted in. So here's personnel manager A. This person is more in the kind of the Rousseau process. This person is trying to create the citizen that the cooperative needs. So my goal is to develop people to become skilled and informed members. I invest at every stage to support their success. I recruit them, I train them, I educate them. This is personnel. I create persons. I create the right persons. Then we've got personnel manager B. And this person says, my goal is to enforce clear expectations that have been defined by the owners and protect against bad actors taking root. Like some people have said, like, don't let the wrong members get in, because once they're in, it's very difficult to get rid of them. So once you have the wrong rulers, it's hard to get rid of them. Similar concept. And then there is personnel manager C, who's like, guys, like, let's not do anything illegal, please. You know? Let's take a show of hands. In your business, whoever's doing this work, who feels like you are more aligned with personnel manager A, that you're like supporting and creating the individual to succeed and thrive? A couple. Who feels that you do more of personnel B, like you make rules and you like protect the company from bad people doing that? A few. And then who feels like personnel manager C is like most of what you do? Okay, a little smattering everywhere. What we kind of derive from these case studies is that worker co-ops tend to avoid personnel stuff, and then something bad happens, and then they revert to one of these positions. So it isn't necessarily that anyone is like starts intentionally trying to do this, but if they find that members need support to get into the cooperative, if they can't find their way in to be a member, then they end up creating all sorts of support systems to help them get there. If they find that the wrong people keep getting in, the people that are going to disrupt the business or don't have the right culture, then they end up forming other kind of systems. And if they, for whatever reason, they're a regulated industry or there's legal issues, then they may end up just saying this is just illegal stuff. It's not about humanity or citizenry. This is about just following the law and not getting in trouble. So we looked at the range of what personnel is, and it can be all these different things, recruiting, evaluating, and offering legal advice, and measuring job satisfaction, keeping track of keys and lockers, and responding to low performers. And we went and talked to about 10 different worker co-ops, and we asked them, do you do this? And if so, who does this? And then how does it work? Generally, we found that it was never concentrated in one person, that these things were distributed throughout. So finance might do some of it, management may do some of it, and the whole membership may do some of it. These roles are kind of distributed throughout. And maybe it's because they're small firms, or there may be other reasons for that too. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through these case studies just because we're short on time, but the slides are available afterwards if you guys want to dig in and read them. Just ask me, I can get them to you. So again, we asked who does the work, who is investing and supporting, and then who is defining expectations for workers and kind of doing that controlling side. So, like I said, there are 10. I'm actually not going to address all 10 for the sake of time, but I'll start with the Cheese Board Collective. So, who's heard of the Cheese Board Collective?
I've been there.
Yeah? It's awesome. Yeah, delicious. Venerable Berkeley business, been around since 1971. The Ares Many Bakeries that I worked for came out of the Cheese Board. It spun off businesses, very positive for the community. Totally avoided kind of doing personnel for 40 years. They had no managers, they had no performance evaluations. They finally implemented performance evaluations recently. And the woman I was interviewing said, we brought it up every year for 25 years. And this one guy was like, we're not doing performance evaluations. So they had one person block the idea for 25 years straight. Amazing. And they got into legal trouble over the last couple of years for not complying with labor law. So they had some kind of costly settlements for a sexual harassment suit, a racial discrimination suit, and some other suit. And they said, hey guys, we have to do something about this. So they were expensive suits to settle, and they realized they can't continue what they're doing. And basically what they said that they couldn't do was just say, hey, who here wants to do something about personnel and take a volunteer and just let that person run off, which is how their business is run. Basically who's interested in marketing? And so then that person is the marketer. They realized they had to make the personnel person trained, know what they're doing, have professional connections, take it to another level. So they're kind of responding to that. They are an example of a group that neither really supported the personnel nor controlled the personnel. And one of the things that you find with them and other businesses who don't support the personnel is that it's very hard for new members to find their way into membership. It's like they have to assign them a buddy to get into membership, which seems very natural to some of us who are in the co-op system. We're like, oh yeah, buddy's a great thing. But it's kind of like trying to climb the Alps or something like that. They're take a friend, you could get lost. There's a snowstorm. If you find that that there has to be a specific person helping you into the membership, maybe your system's a little bit labyrinthine. Maybe you don't need to have that complex. So, nothing wrong with a buddy other than that. So Opportunity Threads is a cut and sew factory down in Morganton, North Carolina. It is mostly made up of Mayan immigrants from Guatemala, and they also kind of avoid the personnel thing. They don't feel like they need it, and they have stand-up meetings to get things done. But they have a slightly the one thread I want to pick out of this one is that they're very focused on performance. So personnel for them is kind of overlaps with productivity in a big way. So they have a big wall, and you have to report your numbers every day. And this woman walks around and collects your numbers of how many pieces you produced and puts them up on the wall. And they consider that to be a form of personnel, which is it's pretty much transparency. It's a financial reporting, but also is are you meeting this standard? It has a kind of disciplinary sort of punitive feeling a little bit. They think of it as sort of inspiring, but it's the wall is watching, that everyone is I'm not making my numbers, I'm not making numbers, I gotta work faster, I gotta work harder. They do some sort of education to try to train people into that kind of high productivity, but they find that a lot of people who can't keep up, they just leave the cooperative. So they have a hard time getting past the founding group, which is founding group are just rock star in sewers. You know, they can like do amazing levels, and new members have a hard time like meeting that level. Union Cab in Madison, Wisconsin has a sort of similar thing. They don't do performance evaluations, but they report this like revenue per mile and revenue per hour. And their opinion is that that's all you need. Basically, if you're a driver, you don't need to know how like touchy-feely you are. You just need to know, are you hitting your numbers and how do you compare to the rest of the co-op? They think that will incentivize performance enough. They don't need someone to say, like, that's a nice person. You know, that doesn't matter to them. What I heard from them also is that right now they have 240 workers, all members, and 200 of them are drivers. If they tried to institute a new evaluation system now, first of all, nobody wants it. 200 drivers would reject it. But second of all, it would be a very expensive kind of new addition. So they have these obstacles to getting a performance evaluation system now. If they had started something years ago, maybe it would have grown and flourished. But it sort of is a hint towards, you know, starting when you're small, putting systems in place that you would like to see when you grow, because they probably will never have performance evaluations. This group, Blue Scorcher, it's a bakery in Astoria, Oregon. They've been growing a lot recently. They have 33 workers, 10 members. And again, there's a lot of information there. I'm just kind of trying to draw out one sort of interesting tidbit. So for membership, they want people to be motivated to join. So where the cheese board assigns a Sherpa to like help you to the top of the mountain, they provide a list of things that you have to do. It's a list of trainings and a list of accomplishments that you have to do within the first 6 months. I'm forgetting where it doesn't say there, but they basically say like, you know, here's a list of qualifications you have to find for yourself. You have to learn how to use this mixer. You have to learn how to make this product. Go find someone to train you, and they don't assign a buddy. And so the result is that the people who get into the business are very self-motivated. So to some of you, maybe this feels like exactly who you want. You want self-motivated people. But what it ends up doing in our interview, they said that it ends up having like a kind of homogenizing effect of who's in the business. So if certain people are feeling comfortable for other reasons, it may look like they're not self-motivated in the business, and ends up having a kind of a way in which all the people who end up getting in are very similar. So that's what they do. That works for them. It's good, but they could choose a different route where they're helping people along. And I think, you know, the more that our organization has looked at developers who are focusing on low-income populations, the more they feel that like this idea of a self-motivated person can actually be like a proxy for not having education or not having the background, the assets that, you know, from their previous life that will build them to get to this position. So most folks who are working on low-income cooperative development build in some sort of support system to help people get into membership, rather than providing like a list of things they have to accomplish and then saying, get back to me in 6 months when you've done this. You know, like giving PDFs to people and saying, come back to me when those PDFs have helped you form your business. You know, it's like, it can only go so far. This is sort of an interesting one. So Xmas Engineering, also in Madison, they did performance evaluations for a long time, and then they decided that it was just too much. So they now have a 3-question performance evaluation. Should this person stay in their position, be promoted, or be demoted? And if enough people vote for either promotion or demotion, then it triggers a process. So for 95% of people in the company, everyone's like, oh yeah, they're doing fine. And the 3 questions are the extent of it. It's a very like low intensive process. But for the 5% who need to like go up or down, then they do a full process and review and interview. So they're trying to like save money with a large business, you know. So that was a way for them, and that it kind of made me think of Union Cab in a way. What would be like the minimal amount of performance evaluation that you could put in where you would actually really get feedback, and it wouldn't cost too much. Centerpoint Counseling in rural Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin. The thread that's interesting there is that their performance reviews are called performance celebrations, and they love them. They're like so good. They talk about what the person is bringing to the business, and it's a mental health counseling cooperative. You know, they believe in that. But if there's discipline to be done, it doesn't happen in the performance celebration. It happens to the GM. So there's 2 tracks, you know? So they're actually doing both of these concepts that I brought up initially. They're supporting person, they're also creating opportunities for discipline, but they're totally separate tracks because for whatever reason, mixing them would be too difficult or complicated for them. And they feel it works. what they have said to me in terms of like thinking about the big picture is that what's really important to them is focusing on retention of the sense of purpose of their members, their hearts and minds. So their human resource committee primarily is focused on this kind of like maintaining the spirit of the individual. And it sounds a little touchy-feely, but they do very hard work as mental health counselors, and if they don't, it's like that's the tool that they need. Where one of, you know, might need a saw or a hammer or something else, they need people's like spirits and souls to be like ready to deal with the mental health challenges that they face. So that is important to them. And I'm going to skip equal exchange, namaste solar, and just end here to say, so these are the kind of questions that I would put to you when you say like, what is personnel, and what you might be thinking about. You know, there's the general one of like, as people go through this life cycle of membership, how do they get feedback, who's it coming from? And then there's these two tracks, who's helping them into membership, who's developing the person? And then secondly, who's defining the rules that control the person? Who's bringing them up, and who's making sure they don't go up if they shouldn't go up, you know, so to speak, or go in if they shouldn't go. So those are just some ideas, and I'll pass it off.
One thing I wanted to bring up from that presentation is that, what did you say that Cheese Board didn't have performance evaluations and a handbook?
Managers.
They didn't have managers.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting here and you're thinking, oh my God, we also don't have performance evaluations, or like we haven't figured out the managerial structure and we're going to get sued like Cheese Board, you should know you don't have to have performance evaluations. I'm actually a big fan of not having performance evaluations if they're not getting you anywhere, which is not to say you shouldn't have feedback, which is important. But an annual evaluation, over and over, I hear how much like this is so much work and I can't get anything done because I'm worried about the evaluation. So don't do it. There's actually a lot of things that you can just, very minimal amount of stuff you have to do. The rest of it you get to carve up based on your culture, what motivates you. You know, we heard performance evaluations that are annual. We heard some don't have them. Sometimes it's celebration. Sometimes, you know, when you're small, that's a great opportunity for you to say, okay, what do we actually value? What are we doing? And then be like, okay, let's think about this purposefully, and then let's build a system that makes sense for us, and then let's go from there. Very few amount of things you actually have to do. It sounds like in that Cheese Board thing, one of the ones you had to do was dealing with sexual and racial harassment, which it sounds like they didn't do that. So do that. But the other things, performance evaluations, managers even, you don't necessarily have to follow a very traditional path to leadership and policy. Okay, so my little segment, we're going to talk about some personnel concerns in an employee ownership situation. And I'm going to give you some general rules and then talk about 2 specific laws as an example. And then at the end, if you have questions about specific things or something like that, of course, we can talk about. Something you should know about the general employment law sphere is really molded towards a traditional workplace environment. So laws are written in a way that, especially like laws that are out there to protect employees' rights are written in a way that assumes that you're in a hierarchical structure, and so therefore the only thing the entity can do is abuse its employees if these laws aren't there. Which we know was, before these laws were enacted, was what was happening, which is why they're there. This actually has almost come full circle in that workplaces are now trying to be more participatory, get folks involved, delegate out things, and actually I'm seeing more and more running into legal problems where the laws that are supposed to be protecting employees are being used to stop them from being able to actually participate in a way that's meaningful for everybody. So just keep in mind that you may, in the course of your career, run into legal barriers, and this will feel backwards and silly, and just always remember that they're there to protect employees, but always generally coming from this hierarchical, traditional employment structure. Let's see. So the general rule is, should you ever be sitting there thinking, I'm in a worker co-op, does this law apply to me? The general rule is yes. Generally assume that if there is an employment rule out there, there is no difference between whether an individual is an owner or whether they are a employee, or what the line of ownership is not recognized in like 99.9% of the law. Little areas where this may differ in the state of Vermont, up to 4 of your folks can get by without workers' comp insurance if they are owners. This is such a small sliver of exception, it's not even worth remembering for general purposes. So generally speaking, when you have legal stuff, what you're looking at is what the person does, not their ownership of the organization. I wanted to talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act for 2 reasons. One is this is a good example of that principle, but secondly, I'm getting calls left and right about the new regulatory changes that are coming down the pipeline, and so I thought I would 2 birds with 1 stone situation. Okay, so a little bit of details on this. So the Fair Labor Standards Act is the law that says folks get paid time and a half their regular rate of pay if they work more than 40 hours per week. They set minimum wage, things like that. There are new regulations coming into effect December 1, and what these regulations are doing is, okay, so we've got the Fair Labor Standards Act. The act in and of itself classifies exemptions, people who are exempt from compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Within each of those exemptions, there's like 87 of them. But the big ones, the ones that we see most of the time, are called the white collar exemptions, which are, they deal with people who are the managers, who make decisions on behalf of the organization, things like that, like the leadership generally, managers. If you are in a worker-owner situation, you may have a higher percentage of these folks than a non-worker-owner situation. So if the person does those duties, they call them the primary duties test, so they're in a leadership role, they help form the direction of the entity, and they make a set salary, then this person can make a set wage. This person then can earn a salary. They are exempt from overtime regulations. You pay them amounts, they do the job. Up until December 1st, I have never asked clients when I do this test for them. I always say, tell me what this person does, describe for me their job, and then we make an analysis. Because up until December 1st, the salary test has been a salary of $455 per week, which is the equivalent of $11 an hour, roughly. So I don't even ask, because if you've got someone who is who's in a managerial role, generally they're making more than $11 an hour anyway. I don't even ask. I sometimes forget that's even part of the test. So let that come back to haunt me, because December 1, they are more than doubling that salary test, and it will now be $47,476 annually. And what that means is if you have, regardless of what someone does for their job, if they make less than that 47,000 figure, you cannot pay them a salary anymore. You have to switch them over to being a non-exempt worker, which means they will earn an hourly wage, you pay them overtime, things like that. If you are in a nonprofit, if you are in a new business that is just starting out, if you are in a retail business, you might be thinking, your heart might be increasing in pulse right now, because that is a lot of your leadership staff will be under that 47,000 number. So this is just something to be looking at and something that you should know about. And the key part here, for the purpose of this seminar, is that if they are an owner of the organization, that is not a consideration in this test. So just because someone's an owner doesn't mean they get to do whatever they want. So this is one of those. I'll use this as an example of the general. We sort of think we're doing what we're doing as worker owners, but sometimes it comes back to catch us. Yes.
Can you do the primary duties test again, real quick?
Okay, there are so many of them. So let me give you a quick example. If you need the details on this, and don't quote me here, because the language on all of these, like there'll be a 1 sentence, and the definition of this is 1 sentence. It has 4 parts to it, and the body of law behind each of those 4 parts is so in-depth and intricate that, in fact, when I give clients advice on this for my own malpractice thing, I say, I think you are generally leading towards exempt status, but I will never on my law license ever say that person is exempt, because it's such a big body of law. So if you need to Google this, the Google search phrase will be white collar exemptions. You are probably looking for administrative exemption, you're probably looking for professional exemption, and you are looking for executive exemption. Those are the 3. And each of those has 4-part tests underneath them that generally require, like if it's managerial, you have to supervise at least 2 other people as a primary duty. The administrative, you have to have, this is the one with the tricky phrasing. The administrative one is tough. You have to have a job of a high level function where you make independent judgment and use discretion, and who knows what that means? You know, I mean, like it's such a so anyway, so now is a good time, even if your folks make more than the 47 number, to reevaluate the primary duties test. Every time I work with a client, I find an error here. It's very incredibly common.
I have an actual personal question to ask him about, because it's an employee. We give him
Hypothetical asking for
salary.
a friend. Yeah.
Right, and he only works 30 hours.
Okay.
You know? And I said, well, I'm going to give you the salary, the job is for 40,
Mm-hmm.
but he regularly works 30, and I know he's, well, I work at home, I sleep on the job, and I'm thinking about the job, and I'm dreaming, and all this stuff.
Same, I get that. Yeah.
But according to this, from what I understand, he's not going to be on salary anymore after December. He goes to 30 hours if that's all he's really working.
Yeah. So I'm assuming this individual is making less than 47,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yes, that is true. Which brings up, okay, I'm going to be risky. I'm going to tell you that there is a small sliver of an exemption, but I'm telling you ahead of time, do not use this without knowing exactly what you're doing, and I'm not about to give you enough information about this. But there is an ability. We use the phrase exempt, non-exempt, and we use hourly and salary, and we use them interchangeably, conversationally. Trust me, guys. Be good with me. Don't quote me on this and be like, our lawyer said. There is the potential to have a non-exempt employee and pay them a salary. And the way this works is you actually pay them a salary for all hours worked up to 40. So let's say, I make, oh God, I have to do math on the spot. Whatever, it doesn't matter. You make X amount of dollars, that is at least this salary test amount for the first, under that, scratch that part. You make a salary for the first 40 hours. The key here is that if this person works a minute over 40 hours, you have to calculate an overtime rate. I highly discourage you from taking this route because you every single week have to look at their numbers. Did they work a minute over? Did they work a minute over? High liability here. But if you have someone who always works 25 hours a week, ish, and they might flex up to 30, there is an option technically for you to pay them a salary. This is just a very legally sticky area, so I do not encourage you walking down this route unless you've definitely talked about it and worked through that.
Well, and they'd have to have time cards.
And it does
It
not
would
exempt
say
you from
25
all of the
hours
requirements. Yeah, so
on
they
every
still
card.
have to have time records. They still have to. It doesn't exempt you from any requirements. It just allows you to pay them a salary. I think it is not worth it, but every now and again I find a client that's doing it and it works for them. So there is an option. I just don't recommend you do it. Cool. The next example I want to talk about was the National Labor Relations Act. This came up a little bit in our presentation earlier this morning. Okay, so in worker co-ops, it is very common to have people, as you mentioned, who wants to be the marketing manager? I do. Cool, you're the marketing manager. Like, who wants to do that, And so people's hands are involved in a lot of stuff. And we sort of like that about our culture, right? Like, everyone sort of chips in and we're doing it. Dun, dun, dun. So here is some concerns. When you have a lot of supervisors, okay, so let me back up. National Labor Relations Act defines, it puts a line in the sand, not by ownership, but by what a person does. And there are about 17 things that a person could do under statute that make them a supervisor. You only have to do one of them to qualify. So generally speaking, this is hire, fire, make recommendations about pay, make decisions involving some other employee's terms and conditions of employment, or have a voice that is loud in the room when we talk about that. So like a weighty opinion into the matter. If you do one of those things, you are arguably considered a supervisor under the National Labor Relations Act. When you are a supervisor, you lose the protections of the National Labor Relations Act. So, something to keep in mind, and I am not recommending you do this or not do it or whatever. Whether this is good or bad depends on which side of the litigants table you are at. But what you might be doing by allowing people to become overly involved and have a lot of say in things is you might actually be inadvertently removing their rights under the National Labor Relations Act, which I don't think means you should then abuse them because you're not protected anymore. It's just that you should know that if they in turn wanted to unionize or something, you may have actually withdrawn their ability to do so. Inadvertently, like in an attempt to be helpful, you might have been unhelpful. Just something to keep in mind. Also, we talked about a little bit, like in my last session, about overly participatory workplaces. If you have, this is out in the weeds of labor law, so this is way out there, but it exists. If you have committees where employees are highly involved, so we're talking safety committees where you help determine safety policy, policy committees where we talk about what should be in the handbook and go back and forth on is this good, is this bad, how do we want to grow, grievance committees, imagine my surprise after 10 years of doing these things and encouraging my employees to get involved. Fast forward 10 years, I become a lawyer, and imagine how cold my blood ran when I realized that this is totally illegal. You live and you learn, right? So what this is called the unlawful employer domination of a labor union. And what it means is if the employer, the entity, creates a committee, and that committee is responsible for helping form policy, negotiate back and forth, to help give direction, anything like that, what you are doing, and it's actually been unlawful since like the 30s, but who knew? What you're sort of doing is you are, again, remember all laws are about hierarchical workplaces, so clearly what the law is trying to prevent is an employer from saying, oh yeah, you guys are super involved, great, why don't you make a little policy committee and we'll talk about it and that'll be fine. And blah, 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 whatever, but I'm still in charge because I'm the employer. So you guys are gonna think you have a voice, but then I just do whatever I want anyway. And that's what they're trying to prevent. We know that what you're trying to do is get people involved. It's a little bit of a barrier there. And my only thought on this is I will say that it is, just because it's illegal, I'm not actually gonna advise you to not do it. You get to sort of take into your own consideration, like maybe you get super good benefit, employee morale, great ideas, help with work that needs to get done, and so you acknowledge like, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of legal risk here and we're gonna bear that out because we benefit from this. And that's totally fine. And as you grow your HR departments or your administrative departments, I'm a lawyer, I'm supposed to tell you this is when it's illegal, and that's great. And sometimes you're not going to listen to me. And you know what? I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Because you get to decide as you build your HR department, where do you tolerate risk? Where do you toe the line? Something like that. So as you grow your departments, that was the example I wanted to get out of.
How does this apply if everyone's an owner?
If everyone is an owner,
Is it
this one in
relevant
particular?
at all?
If everyone is an owner, and so everyone, let's say, makes the decision about whether other people get to be owners, makes the decision about, do they get promoted, demoted, or stay in their position, if you are making a vote about whether someone gets promoted or demoted and you have the right to be in that room and have a voice that matters, you are making a determination about the terms and conditions of someone else's employment. You are therefore probably, arguably, a supervisor.
And no one's protected under.
And then everyone, arguably, I mean, like, it depends on whether you want to argue the point one way or the other. If you're on the employer side and you're under fire, I'm going to argue the hell out of that on your behalf, because that's how you get out of legal trouble as an employer. Yeah, so it at least creates the question that maybe as owners, you've lost the right to those protections. So anyway, so my time is super up, but this is my contact information, and we'll be around after for questions and all of those shenanigans.
In trying to put something together, I have a lot of slides, and I don't know if I'm even gonna show you because they had nothing to do with the list. What I had put something together on was the very primary basic aspects of making sure that in the wonderful feeling of how much we love co-ops and the vibe and the feel that comes from all of that, was that we were making sure that, that we were paying attention to how important employee handbooks were. Because it's almost, when you get the fever of the co-op or the ESOP fever and you're feeling good about, we're not only going to fix this, we're going to make the world right too. We just want to go and we want to do it and we want the energy, we want anything there until we hit that first speed bump. And then all of a sudden, everybody's looking at each other saying, well, that's not cool. And that doesn't really, that covers like a multitude of issues that come up, but not a whole lot of solutions. So one of the things I was going to talk about was how important the employee handbook was, and making sure that everybody had it in their hands, that people participated in that process, there was some sort of record that they got it, and that it was a living document, that it grew with the co-op or the ESOP as you went along. Now, saying that, and I think that's really important, I think it also kind of covers, and I'm trying to kind of touch base because content was so rich on both my co-presenters' presentations. For example, on performance appraisal, I completely agree with you, and yet lenders will often look for that in an audit of, do you have performance appraisals and what are you doing with them? And, I agree that that process is antiquated and not necessarily helpful, and I don't know of anybody who, has raised their hand in a self-help group saying, I have truly been transformed because of my last performance evaluation. I am the better person that you see in front of you today. I don't think that happens. And I think it's because we've had a system that hasn't worked for so long, that has been so rear view mirrored for so long, that we've always been looking in the past for the last year of history and whatever, that, and I mentioned this in Matt's and Joe's program this morning, that what happens is people behave for the 6 or 7 weeks going up to their performance appraisal process, and then 3 weeks afterwards. And then the rest of the time it's all kind of murky. Managers hate doing them. They're uncomfortable because they haven't been trained on perhaps a better focus for that. Which, if you thought about that opportunity and that process, that practice around coaching, directing, and enabling people to succeed, boy, that's a whole different conversation, whole different feel than what a performance evaluation is. 11 months ago you came in here and, well, you looked at me kind of funny. I didn't care for that, and I wrote that down. That is just not particular. And I'm justing, but sometimes people look for that, or because managers don't like doing it, and they don't like confrontation because one leads to the other. Unless, of course, they're talking to people about little things that are getting in the way and fixing them right away so they don't become big things, so they don't become confrontations. I was chatting with someone who's a manager and I said, well, where are you with this? And straight out he said, listen, if I did those 20 evaluations that I do, I'd have 20 people quitting. You don't see the problem here? First of all, either you've got 20 people who are completely dysfunctional, or you've got this whole system set up in place that's going to crash and burn. Well, I'm telling you what's going to happen if I do that. And so I think there's a lot of things there. So I do think that, if you're going to do something along those lines, either because it is part of your policy or someone else is insisting it, change the tone of it completely. Change it around what is it that the individual needs to be successful in their work, and God forbid, how can you as the supervisor help them? Help them succeed, help them, because there are 3 reasons why someone can't do a work. They physically, mentally cannot, they do not know how, or they do not want to. So the first 2 you better make sure you're really clear on. The third one is a performance issue, and that's something completely different. So that's a little mantra on that. The other piece I was going to talk about is sometimes in co-ops and or ESOPs, it can be very confusing around governance, management, and culture. And again, I keep stealing from you guys from this morning, but you did that little diagram about members, going to board, going to management, and then back to members. And as I was looking at that, for me, finally I got a clear picture in my head. Board is about governance. It's about how a co-op should be in fact run, and how that needs to happen. And board decisions are not management decisions. And for some folks that are new in the process, that's a whole new concept of, it's very hard to sort because they have very little experience in either. Management is about, it's about the process of getting things done. It's procedural. It's making sure the day-to-day stuff is accomplished, performance, the things that need to do to keep the business sustainable and viable. And members is about culture. When I'm talking to folks and they're working in a new to a co-op or whatever, I'm saying, here is your opportunity to change all the stuff you've complained about all through your work life in other jobs. All the things, all the artificial BS that goes on that has nothing to do with the outcome, the work, your relationship with others, the person you work for, the person that works for you, all that artificial stuff. This is your opportunity to do something about making that all go away. This is the opportunity to work in an organization that values you for who you are, what you have to say, what you contribute, and making something that is something to believe in. And that is something that and this kind of goes back to that low, perhaps low income and folks that have not been exposed to anything like this before. When you're starting to talk to them about a whole new world of looking at working someplace that's going to make a difference in the community. You know, for a lot of folks and for a lot of employers, it's a safe place to work and they pay me. And for both camps, that was pretty good. I mean, I didn't get hurt. They're watching out for me, and I get paid when I'm supposed to. And for many years, I did employment and training agreements. I would get the final say at CEI about whether or not we'd do gap financing, sometimes millions of dollars on a deal. I would get the final say on that, based on the nature and culture of that organization and how they were with their employees. And boy, brokers and lenders were not happy when they got a no. But the whole point of that was working with folks, being able to take a look at saying, this is the organization we work in, these are the things that we believe in will make us better at what we do. As owners, we need to be productive, we need to be doing a great job at what we do, and we need to listen to the voice of the customer so that everything we do is value added from that standpoint. And then what we also need to do is we also need to have a culture of work and civic engagement that's different than just a regular employer, because there's almost an example that we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard of everybody here counts. We value, if we're going to do participatory management or leadership, we need to be able to engage people, we need to be able to listen, but we also need to work differently and at a higher standard. So for folks that have been always used to working and the only thing they had was grumbling, or the kind of the impulsive-aggressive or passive-aggressive kinds of behavior that really doesn't have anything to do with the work, but that's all they had, and to say, you don't have to do that anymore. You can work at a whole new level, you're working a whole new engagement, but it's going to take some sort of discipline. And for folks that have not been exposed to that, there are things that are a challenge, such as being ambitious learners. If you've never had if school was a bad experience for you, even if you got through high school, and it was not a positive experience, learning something new always has a negative consequence to it. So that's a whole new mindset. So the ability to learn how to learn is something new. And ambitious learning is actually being eager about wanting to do that. Another skill that isn't often shared at that level is active listening. The ability to actually hear someone where they're coming from, not put up roadblocks and solutions to whatever's going on, because for most of us, we've been trained one way or another to kind of managers create solutions. We create solutions, bang, 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 we crank them up, 15 at a time, doesn't matter if they're any good. We just do them fast, fast, fast. It doesn't matter, did you ever go to someone and you have an issue and you want to talk to them about it, and you start saying, well, here's what's going on. Well, have you tried this? Well, no, let me tell you. So, well, what about that? Have you tried this? This would be really good. What worked for me? And then all of a sudden we're talking about them instead of you. And it's because our culture has always kind of pushed people to kind of get it solved and move on. And that's a whole new process. It's a whole different style of teaching people to learn how to listen, help people get to for many people, they can get to their own solution if they can just not be roadblocked by either, oh, you poor thing, or I got the sympathy card, you don't want the sympathy card, I got, oh, how about this, you don't know what you're talking about, picture.
I work for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, but I was an employment counselor for many years, and we're all products of our parents' generations and everything that happens, and I have a favorite phrase always, that perception is reality. And I think the point is, and I think the problem could be sometimes, I've never seen my parents get laid off from an employer, right? They're always dedicated, always doing great, and I think there's a whole generation that's seen their parents, their relatives, going through pain, these folks that have put in years and years and years with companies, and I think, looking at that different attitude, and maybe I want mine right now, because I might not be here in 3 years or 2 years because you'll just lay me off like you did to my Uncle Larry or whomever. So, I think like in dealing with anything, I think we need to make sure to see where these young folks or old folks or whoever walk in their shoes a little bit to start to understand why maybe some of these sort of universal attitudes might be out there.
I'm really curious about the cheese board in California. How did they succeed for 60 years? I mean, 60 years in business without management or reviews.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good success story of not having reviews or management.
That's true. 45 years.
Or
That's-
45
I mean,
years.
still.
Yeah.
And how did they succeed? They
Dedicated.
good cheese. I mean, they have a great product and they're loyal customers and they're very nice people. And they use peer pressure as their main lever to get rid of bad actors. And they have
Kind of cliquey.
$8 million in
Yeah.
income.
I can't
know.
speak to them, but that's a very common. You can get pretty far on no policies, no rules, and no leadership if you're cliquey. I'm not saying that this is what their thing was, but if everyone comes to the table with like the same perspective, you can go real far because we're all running on the same underbelly set of beliefs. And but sometimes it leads to like peer pressure to get people out. I mean, I would be real pissed if I was the person they were forcing out and I was doing my job right. You know, I mean, like, it works. It's not
They
pretty,
have
but
kind
it
of a
works.
cult status in
Yeah.
the community, so they have endless labor source. You know, people really want to work there all the time. They dream and fantasize about working there. So
It's a,
that,
it's a great place, yeah.
helps them to pick the people that they want to pick. But I would say, there was the question about HR for worker co-ops. I tried to address some of that. I think the biggest difference for worker co-ops is that they tend to avoid personnel for longer and succeed in doing personnel for longer. That's the biggest difference, but maybe at their detriment, there's some advantages to actually engaging with that material. Not just defense and avoiding risk, but building the culture they want to build and bringing in the people you want to bring in and making sure they succeed.
So here's a great little recipe. If you want your co-op or ESOP to do very well, promise to employees that they will get as much as they put in and then deliver.
I'll give you a little nugget that I always play with, and I call it my lather, rinse, repeat of HR, because it's 95% of the job. Set the expectation, demonstrate using the expectation, revisit the performance of the expectation. Reset it if you need to, allow them to demonstrate it, check in on how they're doing, give that feedback. Reset the expectation. So if you're having people who are like, oh yeah, I don't deal with that sticky HR issue, we're gonna chop down with the food chain. You may have to deal with it today, but then tomorrow you sit down with them and say, listen, part of what I need you to do is your role of manager here is to manage. So let's have a conversation about how we're going to empower you to make those decisions by yourself. So that I don't have to do them. Did we want to, we got just a few minutes left, talk about small businesses?
Well, I thought your favorite was going to be things that go boom.
Oh yeah, well, that was a small
Same thing.
business piece. Yeah, same thing, that's right. What are things, okay, small business folks. I totally understand that the law is a scary place, and I understand that 95% of the law seems to be this gray, nebulous thing that's out there. And it is totally normal for business folks to say, you know what, that sounds so substantial and significant that I think what I will do is just ignore it and hope it goes away. Totally normal. It's actually just know, for the most part, I mean, I can't stand up here and itemize all the laws for you and tell you all the things you need to do and all of that. What I will say is that 95% of the time, if you go forth with good intention, thinking broadly, not allowing misconceptions or sort of don't put your stuff on someone else in the sense of one example, I once had a client who called, their worker was pregnant. They own a pet food store. Their worker was pregnant, and he said, I think we gotta fire her. And I said, I don't think you should do that. And he said, no, but you don't understand. She has to clean the cat litter, and I know that that's bad for pregnant women. I don't want her to get hurt, and it's really important to me that she stays healthy and the baby stays healthy, right? 100% good intention out the door. Also pregnancy discrimination, so don't do that, generally. So just check yourself before you wreck yourself about putting too much of your internalization on someone else. But generally speaking, 95% of the law is just moving forward with good intention, thinking broadly, doing the thing that's right. The other 5% is nitty-gritty details that people do wrong every day, and if you end up down that road, we'll fix it, but, you know, generally speaking, just try and do the thing that's good, and you generally end up in the right direction.
Is that just a Vermont thing?
You're
Is
right.
that across the country?
That's generally across the board. Try and just be a nice person. It'll get you pretty far. Surprise.